I call the April 26, 2022 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega.
Present.
Vice Mayor Tammy Caputi.
Here.
Council members Tom Durham.
Here.
Betty Janik.
Here.
Kathy Littlefield.
Here.
Linda Milhaven.
Here.
And Solange Whitehead.
Here.
City Manager Jim Thompson.
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott.
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews.
Here.
City Auditor Sharon Walker.
Here.
And the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Very good. We do have Scottsdale police officers Anthony Wells and Sergeant Brian Heiner, as well as the firefighter Derek Owen, should anyone need assistance. Let's begin with the pledge. Councilman Durham. Thank you. We continue to keep the Ukrainian people and country at the forefront of our thoughts. Let's pause in silence as we hope for their freedom and democracy. Thank you. So it's Earth Week in the world and here in Scottsdale. We had a great turnout for Earth Day, the event at the Thomas Groundwater Facility, but there are plenty of other events throughout the week, ending with Arbor Day on Friday, the 29th. Also, we continue to keep the Salt River firefighter paramedic, Tyler Packer, in our thoughts as he continues to recover, as well as the family and friends of the Salt River Fire Department as they grieve the loss of the firefighter EMT Brendan Bessie. We'll move on to the presentations. We have an Earth Week presentation. Stephanie Hirata is the Public Affairs Specialist, and Lisa McNeely is the Sustainability Director. Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I'm Stephanie Hirata, Public Affairs Specialist with the Office of Communication, and with our Sustainability Director, Lisa McNeely. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about our week-long celebration to recognize Earth and Arbor Day. We kicked off Earth Week this past Friday on April 22nd at Pima Park with a Mayor and Council Green Expo breakfast. We had about 12 booths at the event, city departments and local organizations talking about a variety of sustainability topics to encourage residents to think about the environment and take action, whether it's reducing waste by reusing products, recycling, or composting, being more mindful about the amount of water we use and avoid wasting it, planting more desert-friendly trees, which supply us with so many wonderful environmental benefits, including the air we breathe and providing shade, and of course, so much more. We appreciate all who attended to educate and spread awareness and promote sustainability. On Saturday, members of the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission and city staff were at the Old Town Scottsdale Farmers Market giving away small, assorted, desert-friendly trees. We talked with people about the importance of planting trees and SEAC's Citizen Tree Inventory, which is a citizen science project encouraging residents to count trees right outside their homes. We'll hear more about the tree inventory project at the Arbor Day celebration this Friday. And one resident actually came up to us and was very proud to share that they had picked up a tree from our table last year and showed us photos of how their tree is growing and thriving. And you can see the before and after photos on the right-hand side. Also, over the past few days, the city held its Adopt a Road spring cleanup with Keep Scottsdale Beautiful. City employees and residents took to the streets to pick up litter, and they set a record. A total of 71 volunteers participated in this cleanup to celebrate Earth Day. 501 people cleaned more than 142 miles of roadway and removed more than 2 tons of trash. Adopt a Road participants commit to at least 3 cleanups a year, and so even though we have groups throughout the year cleaning our roadways, we encourage as many groups as possible to get inspired by Earth Day and to get out and clean their designated areas. We also partnered with the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy to host a few guided walks at the preserve to admire nature's beauty right outside our doors. At these events, natural resource coordinators shared their knowledge about the preserve and the wonders of the Sonoran Desert. And we have a few upcoming events ending on Arbor Day, Friday, April 29th. We have one more guided nature walk tomorrow morning at Brown's Ranch. There will be 2 virtual webinars on Thursday. Scottsdale 360 is a virtual learning series about people, policies, and programs that shape our community. This class in particular, Water Wise, will be about how we're asking residents and businesses to voluntarily reduce water use by at least 5% due to the Colorado River shortage. Scottsdale Water Policy Manager Gretchen Baumgartner will talk about the city's resources portfolio, conservation efforts, and how residents and businesses can help. The second one in the evening is part of our Green Building webinar series. The nonprofit organization Solar United Neighbors will talk all about solar power. And last, but certainly not least, we will end our week-long celebration with a tree planting. It will be at 8 a.m. at Bell Road Sports Complex. Scottsdale is proud to be recognized as a Tree City USA for the 40th year. That's more times than any other Arizona community. And Mayor Ortega will read the Arbor Day proclamation, and there will be guest speakers from the Scottsdale Garden Club and Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission. To find out more information about these upcoming events or to register for the webinars, you can visit scottsdaleaz.gov and search Earth Week. Well, that concludes my part of the presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Are there any questions? Okay, I will turn it over to Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Mayor Ortega, Vice Mayor Caputi, and the council members. It's really a pleasure to be here today at my first city council meeting. I'm going to lower this. I'm a little vertically challenged. You know, if you were at the Green Expo on Friday, you heard me mention an old saying that the 2 best times to plant a tree are 20 years ago and today. I wanted to share it again tonight because I think it is such an important message about calling us to invest broadly in our environment and to lead, to be a city that starts early and keeps innovating. And we all know all of the different ways that the city has started early and has innovated, whether it's water, green building, you know, a whole range of green infrastructure, protecting open space. And as sustainability director, I've been asked to start planning for the future. So we'll be working on the city's first sustainability plan, building off the general plan, and we'll be bringing it to council for adoption in December. We'll be working on another priority area is an urban heat plan. There's a study that's been done that will be posted soon, and we'll be looking for more ways to share more ways that we can address and hopefully mitigate and manage that heat. But I'm also, you know, glad that we can talk about efforts to do more engagement. Events like this week, where we had so many volunteers, so many attendees, want to make sure that we can share the stories from the city and to make sure that all voices are heard. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time. We're well within time, and just to see if there were any other questions for me as well. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's continue to celebrate Earth Day week, month, year as we move forward. The next item on the agenda is public comment. It's an opportunity for any Scottsdale citizen to come forward and speak on a non-agendized item, which would be within the council jurisdiction. No council action can be taken on the public comment, and the speakers are limited to 3 minutes to address the council. Per our rules, we have 5 speakers available at this time, in person or remote, and I show 5 in person. The first will be David Abramnovic and Stephen Cummings. Please step forward, Mr. Abramnovic.
Well, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I'm really here out of a sense of desperation, to be honest. We've been living in front, this video showing some scenes from the front of our house, in front of a resident that's been operating a business freely out of his residential home, a diesel repair, wrecking, auto wrecking, construction business. And we've been working with the code enforcement for more than 10 years to try and get this business shut down and to get this property in compliance with the zoning ordinances that I read and seem pretty clear to me that the city council here passed. And it's been a struggle, and for one reason or another, just the code enforcement can't seem to put together a case. There was one case in 2012 that there was a judgment to clean up the property, but it just reverted back to this very quickly. There's equipment being hauled in and out at all hours of the day and night, noise. It's a real disruption to our neighborhood, and I don't think any of you could look at this footage here, which I'll just be very clear was taken from public, accessible locations with a usage of the crop and zoom, so it may appear that I'm closer to these, and I took all these. So we live directly in front of this house, so we're continually experiencing just this noise coming and going of an inappropriate business. And I see this out of my bedroom window, I see it out of my living room window, I see it out of my front porch when I'm trying to enjoy a sunset, I see it when I am in my backyard and I hear the vehicles coming and going. So I'm really here today to try and ask that the council support an action to come to what I would consider a reasonable conclusion of bringing this property into compliance with the city zoning. I mean, it seems like a very simple ask, but for some reason the code enforcement just can't bring this property into compliance. So this is a list of the ordinances that I think are being broken. I put a petition out. We had over 700 people sign it in our community, and it got shared. But clearly this is not something normal for a residential neighborhood, so I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next we have Stephen Cummings and then Laura Norton Swartz.
I think I have a PowerPoint they uploaded. So my name's Stephen Cummings. I live at 11030 North 73rd Street. There we go. So let's, first, my dad left me this property. He passed away in 2021 of COVID-19. He liked to collect, and boy did he collect. So now I am stuck cleaning up this property. It has been looked at multiple times by code enforcement. Every time they come, they say there's no violation. I myself am cleaning this property up to my standards. He was a heavy equipment mechanic, and he stored lots of heavy equipment stuff. It is to note there's an 8-foot wall behind the property, and the only way to look it is to look over the property or to trespass. David Abramovic is my next door neighbor across the street. He has had persistent harassment against my dad since 2005. He initiated a campaign of harassment by the city code enforcement with multiple false claims and accusations. He claimed all the time of an equipment business being run out of the property. My dad worked for the Operating Engineers. He was never an independent contractor. Every time he made that complaint, he was shut down. No actions were ever taken. This is 2 of 114 pages of false accusations and inspections made by the code enforcement that showed there was never a business being run out of that property. Since I am the new owner, I figured me, the code enforcement department, and David could sit down, have a mediation, and maybe figure out something to where he would stop complaining and harassing me. Jorge Espinoza from the code enforcement department brought that up, as well as Rick Valenzuela. He denied it. On 4/19, the police were called because a video was showed by David on the Nextdoor app of him jumping my wall and taking pictures inside of my property. This is what I get every time I come home. He stands at the wall and he has 5 cameras. We found another one pointed at my front door, my side yard, his tree into my driveway. That's harassment. These are some pictures taken from his slides. The first one is me moving a trailer with steel scrap. That trailer sat there for 15 plus years. The next one is me with a bobcat. That bobcat was used for moving a saguaro that fell in my front yard. It's not unloading and loading. The next one is me loading up an engine that sat for 15 plus years as well. I have moved 60 tons of steel so far, 10 vehicles, 5 trailers, all of which were legal in the backyard. No business has ever been conducted out of my home. Here's some pictures. David, however, has a wall that is not in code compliance. It was never permitted, and he has made no attempts to bring it into compliance. I am not in violation. David is clearly in violation, but makes no attempts to fix it. I think I'm being harassed. Thank you for your time.
Next, we have Laura Norton Swartz and Harold Black.
There is a chair there if you want that. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Norton Schwartz. I live at 6705 East Montecito Avenue, and we were here a month ago submitting a petition to have the city build a sidewalk on 68th Street. That night, you voted unanimously to agendize that petition and have the city report back to you. Over the last month, we've had a lot of conversations with staff regarding the planning and funding of the sidewalk along 68th Street between Camelback and Indian School. Staff have been extremely professional and generous with their time. They have been supportive. I think many of them see what we are concerned about. We appreciate those efforts. We would like to continue the work that's being done, and we are looking forward to their report. Tonight, I just wanted to say that as I was looking at the materials for the agenda item 22, which is the Transportation Action Plan, I was taken by the fact that I think that this sidewalk project actually perfectly aligns with the goals and values that are in the 2022 TAP. Just to highlight, goal number 1 is to prioritize people, safety, and livability over motor vehicles and travel speed. Goal 2 is to improve accessibility for all types of transportation and transportation users. And the goal 3 is to promote an active and healthy living in this city. So I hope that we can continue to work on getting this sidewalk built. I think the sidewalk project is in perfect alignment with this transportation vision, and well, we'll see you here when they report. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Councilors. Thank you very much for taking the time to let us speak with you. A month ago, we did speak with you, and we are grateful for your willingness to agendize the whole idea of the sidewalk along 68th Street. To that end, I think it is important to acknowledge City Manager Jim Thompson and his effort to work with staff to do what's necessary to help advance what we believe is a very important project. But it would be foolhardy for us to come here and ignore really what is a challenge to all of you to take time and to go and experience walking along 68th Street between Camelback and Indian School so that you can more clearly understand the challenges that are there. They are significant. And without that support, as things emerge over the coming months, we really do need your support to help get this done. And we would hope that whatever we can do to support that, we can and will. So we want to thank you. We want to express our support for the Transportation Action Plan and for the continued work and effort with staff, and in all be grateful for what you have done so far in advancing this agenda. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, sir. That's Harold Black. Thank you very much. The final speaker for public comment will be Tom Frankel.
Tom Frankel, 6716 Montecito. Actually, a neighbor of Laura Schwartz, coincidentally. I guess I would like to see the sidewalk happen, too. 35 years in Harmony in front of council, and actually never did public comment. And I was here today not for public comment, but I was going to comment on the artisan, and I guess it was tabled, and I know we're not talking about that. But I guess what I'm here to talk about a little bit is balance. And we've got a very unique council, and for a lot of reasons has changed. I've been 35 years talking and appearing and wanting things out of council and hoping for things out of council and all different types of situations. And many times on the wrong end of council, where I was in the gallery area as a small business owner with the largest small property owner in that area, and got chased out by what I thought was, even though I was a developer-friendly council that squashed me and wanted my interests, or my interests were taken away by the larger player in the area. So I know that side of it. And I guess I also know the side of it of being somebody who wants to put a project together and hoping I'm going to get a fair shake and a well-grounded opinion from people. In the case of the project that was going to be heard tonight, of all the people that would be impacted in the whole community, I'm more than anyone because I'm directly across the street with no on-site parking. I've got the building directly to the south, and I've got 2 lots on Main Street, so there's no one that would be more impacted than myself. And don't know the developer, know the zoning attorney, but do not know the developer, and have gotten all the postcards and all the community input and whatever, and felt it was a good job. And I guess my concern is someone who also has things coming down the pike, who has been on the side of being squashed by someone, that also a good project that's well done is considered, and that not only the activists who certainly have a voice and many times haven't had a voice in Scottsdale, but also that the business community that wants to do something is not forgotten and squashed on because people who have a legitimate right to feel that the way they do, okay, but also have the time and the energy to come down here and do it and voice their case. Please don't also forget people that want to have things happen and listen to both sides of it, because I would hate to see it tilt the other way, and I'm scared as someone who's coming forward, will I also get a fair shake? And in the case of this project, as the person most impacted, I would have supported and liked to see it happen, and maybe it still will, but if it's getting derailed by people who want it perfect, there's no way you're going to do something without disruption, period. I'm in the middle of Civic Center Park, and all my buildings are squashed by a beautiful park that you guys approved that I'm so happy is going to happen. It's 2 years of misery, but it's going to be worth it, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel. And I will close public comment. Next, we will have the review and approval of the minutes. I would also ask for any revisions if someone has a change. I would request a motion to approve the retreat minutes of March 22nd, 2022, special meeting minutes of March 29th, 2022, executive session minutes March 29th, 2022, regular meeting and work study session minutes of March 29th, 2022, regular meeting minutes of April 5th, 2022. Do we have a motion and a second?
I move to accept those minutes.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. Any comment? If not, please register your vote. Okay, so that was unanimous. Thank you. Next posted agenda item is are the consent agenda items 1 through 19. We also have an opportunity for public comment on any of the items 1 through 19. My clerk says there are no public comments. There's also an opportunity if, so accordingly, I will close public comment on the consent agenda items. And I would be open if council has a question about any particular item. Otherwise, I would, do I have a, yes, excuse me, go ahead, Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question on item number 6, and if there's someone here who's familiar with that from staff, I'd appreciate it. On page 2 of 6, under context, it's going background, general plan, character area, zoning, context. The Sereno Canyon Resort subdivision is located on the northwest corner of East Pinnacle Peak Road and North 128th Street, with the entire site stretching from Pinnacle Peak northward to East Ranch Gate Road. The subject plat are more specifically located on 128th Street and East Sereno Canyon Parkway. And then on the following page, on page 3, transportation trails, it just has a sentence in here that bothered me, and I'd like a little bit more of an explanation. Access to the proposed development will continue to be provided at East Alameda Road to the west, East Ranch Gate Road to the north through the private streets until such time that North 128th Street, a minor collector street to the east, is constructed to a minimum 24-foot wide paved standard. And I just wanted to make sure that that was not part of the 128th Street thoroughway that is within the preserved boundaries that has been changed from a minor collector.
Mayor Ortega and Councilwoman Littlefield, that is correct. The whole portion of this site is located south of Ranch Gate Road. The portion that you're discussing, which is commonly known as the Gooseneck, is north of Ranch Gate Road.
Thank you very much. I wanted that to be public record. Thank you.
For the record, that was Jesus Murillo on the response from the staff. Any other comments? Go ahead, Councilwoman Janik.
I looked at, we're talking about consent item 3 and 4, which is the permanent extension of premises for Sauce and Francine's. I looked at the map, the diagram for number 3, and I just wanted to make sure that there is an area for the pedestrian walkway.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Councilwoman Janik. Yes, we have been working closely with that business operator to make sure that there's a minimum of 8-foot clearance pedestrian walkway. I know it gets tight there, but we have been working with them, and that is demonstrated on their site plan. And I'm Tim Curtis with the Planning Department.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I see no other requests to speak of council or questions to staff. Accordingly, I would accept the motion regarding consent agenda items 1 through 19.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 through 14.
19.
Second.
19?
19.
A second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Good. Please register your vote. Betty? Thank you. Unanimous. Next, we'll move on to our regular agenda items. Regular agenda items as posted include item 20 through 23. The first item and presentation will come forward is item number 20, rezoning at 13647 North 87th Street, case 10 ZN 2021. Our presenter is Jeff Barnes, Senior Planner. Excuse me.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I am Jeff Barnes with the city's planning department, giving you a presentation for 10ZN 2021. For a little bit of context here, this site is located south of Thunderbird Road, east of 87th Street in the yellow highlighted area. On this map, you can see this site is surrounded by developed single-family residential homes, and it backs up to the 101 freeway to the east there. A little bit closer view of the site in question. Again, you can see it backs right up to the sound wall and improvements for the freeway on the east. There's a cul-de-sac with existing single-family residences to the west. That is the McDowell Shadows Estates. There's a couple of those subdivisions that wrap around north, west, and south of this site. Some important history I'm going to walk through here and try to lay out for you. So this site in question, which is shown in the red highlight on the graphic here, was part of a much bigger site previously, and it was about a 87,500 square foot single-family residential property, and that's approximated in the yellow boundary on this old aerial photo. And just for some context that I'll try to carry forward, the green is highlighting the existing residents at that time in the late 70s. This property was purchased by ADOT and part of it used for the freeway development, and progressing forward a little bit in time but carrying some of those highlights over, you can see still in the yellow where that property existed, where the freeway is now on a majority of that property, where the house was in the green, and where the subject property is in the red highlight. The pink hatched area, sort of linear running west of the sound wall improvements, is what was left of that original parcel after the ADOT improvements. That was about a 30,000 square foot remnant parcel, and it retained the R135 zoning at that time. You can see in this image most of the other residences in the surrounding area had developed at that point in time around this, and this area was left behind. So I mentioned that area was remnant from the ADOT action. It was sold off, and then subsequently that was sold and parceled out even further. And so it was parceled out into 5 sort of fragmented pieces. And those are on this graphic here, numbers 2, 3, 4, 7, and 8. And so those 5 pieces make up that original 30,000 square foot approximate parcel with the R135 zoning. And those parcels in total retain, from a zoning standpoint, the development right of that one original house shifted over from that previous lot before it was taken up by the freeway. Those fragmented actions didn't come through the city process. They're not recognized for individual development as having been legally established. Because of that, they have been recorded with the county. They have parcel numbers, but they're a challenge on our end for acknowledging being able to develop them without further action. And so each of those is sort of color-coded to ownership, and you can kind of see that they're owned by different surrounding parcels there, except for the subject site, which is owned by Mr. Koo. He also owns number 6, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. So those properties, in order to develop independently of their total, would need to either be incorporated into those surrounding parcels or go through a rezoning process of some sort to change their development standards to something compatible with the size of those parcels, or some combination thereof in order to develop. And that's part of what's driving the action before you today. So ultimately, we're looking at a rezoning request for piece 7 here, but there's an end goal of combining it with piece 6, which is a little wedge shape to the west, and then creating one developable lot out of that, which would be the total kind of red that you're seeing, and I'll get into that more too. Wrapping up sort of what's on this slide is that 5 and 6 are portions of Tract C out of the adjacent subdivision. And when the HOA dissolved from that subdivision, Tract C went into private ownership and was divided up and sold off. And so that is an added component to sort of the history of piecing out what's happening here. And it's not part of the zoning request, but it is part of the end goal, and that's why I mention it, because it also provides ultimately access to the cul-de-sac for the development of this lot if the zoning is approved and it continues down the path it's on. Focusing in a little bit closer on this area and maybe just reiterating that this was all once a cumulative parcel that is now 5 pieces. Lot 7, which is the subject piece of that, makes up about 44% of that original property, and under that singular development right of the R135 zoning that's out there. Visually, just connecting what I had alluded to, that the applicant's end goal is to tie those 2 pieces together as one parcel. He had put together this graphic to just conceptually represent where a developable area of that site would be, and represented that through this. And so I wanted to make sure we were showing that as well to talk about this. The outcome is that total, but we're talking about just the one piece. Wrapping up some of the history discussion before we get into, I keep leading back into what's happening now. Previous applicant owned this property, took it through a Board of Adjustment request for variances to the existing R135 zoning on the site. They tried to get essentially all the development standards reduced through variance process, and that request was denied. They were unsuccessful in going that route. That was back in 2013. That was a previous applicant, but it's paved some of the path to now pursuing a rezoning before you here. So present day, the request is to rezone from the R135 to R110 on that portion of that previous remnant parcel, about 13,000 square feet of area, to be combined with that portion of Track C for about a 15,700 square foot lot. So visually, we're talking about changing this area from R135 to R110. Also notably on here in the context of zoning, that previous area was all R135. The adjacent subdivisions to the west, south, and north were all part of a rezoning action previously. I believe that was early to mid-90s. They rezoned from R135 to R118 with the PRD, Planned Residential Development Overlay, which afforded them the opportunity to also adopt amended development standards and create the subdivisions that are out there today. So in some putting comparison to some of those details, the first column on here is the existing R135. Of note on that, it requires a 35,000 square foot minimum lot area. As I mentioned, that original parcel was 30,000 square feet, and this piece of that parcel is only, in combined total, even going to be about 15,700 square feet. And so in order for us to approve the combination of those pieces and the development of that lot, it would have to meet the zoning standards, and it doesn't meet the current zoning standards, which is why they're seeking a rezoning. And the next district down from that, R135, would be R118. R118 requires a minimum 18,000 square foot area, which still doesn't achieve the goal, which is why the applicant is pursuing R110, which is the last column here. So at 10,000 square foot of lot area, that would align with the size of the parceling they have and allow that combination to be approvable in the long-term goal of this. I skipped over the middle column here, which is the R118 PRD I mentioned of the adjacent neighborhood. But for context, it's important they amended their development standards from that 18,000 square feet down to 15,470 as a minimum lot size. The end goal with the current applicant is about a 15,700 square foot parcel, and so in technical comparison of the standards, they are closely aligned. Some of those properties are much bigger or in that realm, but from a development standard standpoint, there is consistency there. Also notable within these development standards is that the adjacent properties zoning has amended their 30-foot building height down to 21 feet. And out of some of the context of public comment and the Planning Commission hearings and the details to this date, the applicant has opted to also limit themselves through stipulation to 21 feet instead of the 30 feet to create consistency. And I'll talk more about that and I've got a little bit of a graphic to go with that too, but it's important to say in the context of this comparison chart here. So I mentioned the Planning Commission. This did go to them back on February 23rd. The Planning Commission did make a recommendation of denial with a vote of 5-2 on this case. This also came before you once before briefly back on 3/29. At that point in time, the applicant had requested a continuance to work on some of the stipulation elements for consistency that I mentioned, one of which was the building height limitation. The other is that they've created a graphic to limit single story of the structure to certain areas of the property. And that would be this graphic on the left of your screen here. And so the hatched area would be where within the building envelope, still within the 21 feet, they could potentially have mezzanine or loft or second story type component to the structure, but limiting that to the west and south where the adjacency is to those other developed existing residential properties. And so this graphic and the stipulation limiting the building height are included in the stipulations in your packet tonight already, and they were part of the action the applicant took between their continuance and now to try to create some more conformity to their request. Just jumping over to the graphic on the right and trying to sort of circle back to an end goal on this. This is what the applicant put together as sort of a comparison and of the R35 setbacks and the R110 as they think it would fit to the property. And then I've added this highlight just to remind that we're talking about the red outlined area as the zoning request, but ultimately the goal is to incorporate the orange outlined area into that to create a single developable parcel out of this site. And the key is lot size in sort of the shortened, focused version of why they're requesting the zoning change to the R110 district specifically. I think that wraps up staff's presentation. I apologize, that was a lengthy go-around, but I'm happy to answer any questions, or the applicant is also
Well,
here.
at this point, we will move to the applicant's presentation. Did you have a question for staff?
I just wanted to clarify, stipulation 10, I think I just want to clarify because I think you went over it, but I want to make sure I understand. In terms of setbacks, so stipulation 10 is saying they're agreeing to setbacks that are greater than would ordinarily be allowed under the zoning that they're requesting, so that it is closer to the zoning in they're stipulating to larger setbacks than the zoning district would require. Is that right?
Mayor Ortega, council member Millhaven, stipulation number 10 is actually defining where within their development they could have more than a single story of building height. And so I don't know if I can jump back to my presentation. The setbacks themselves are fairly similar between.
I see that now. Thank you.
Okay, then we have a question, Vice Mayor Caputi, and then Councilmember Durham. Then we'll have the presentation by the applicant.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. So when we started out, there wasn't enough area to begin with to be R135, so it was already too small. I have a question about, there are other properties in this area that also aren't 18,000 square feet, and yet they have the R118 zoning. So how did they get that exception?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, I believe the answer to that is those properties are likely within the adjacent development that has the R118 PRD, which, as shown in the middle column on the screen here, they've, through the PRD, amended those standards down, and so they would have a lesser minimum lot area through that action, and so they could be smaller than 18,000, but not smaller than 15,470.
So complicated. All right, so what about, could you rezone to R110 but have setbacks and stepbacks that would match more R118, so it would be more contextual to the neighborhood? Or does the lot size dictate the zoning?
Vice Mayor, ultimately, all of the development standards would have to be able to be achieved with the outcome, but in sort of the focus of achieving a developable lot size is at the forefront of that, and so without without a set of development standards that allows a lot of that size, the setbacks would be meaningless in the terms of being able to create a developable lot. And so even if, so they're requesting the R110 because it most closely aligns to the size of their parcel, and unamended R118 would not be a viable solution for them. They couldn't pull the R118 PRD over to their site without affecting the entirety of that PRD, which has its own justification components and analysis and things in its history. And so
you can't have R110 zoning with R118 setbacks and stepbacks. Again, I'm just trying to figure out some sort of a hybrid approach, because the issue is it's not going to be contextual to the neighborhood, and I think that's what I would think that's the struggle here. You're trying to...
And Vice Mayor, contextually, without applying an additional zoning overlay to make that happen, the closest alignment that between staff and the applicant we've been able to achieve through the stipulations is adding the building height restriction, creating the graphic that defines where within the building envelope they can do specific things. And so it's working towards that without implementing that full extra zoning overlay aspect of it.
Wow. Okay, I have more questions, but that's good for staff for the moment. Thank you.
Councilmember Durham, and then we'll have the applicant.
Thank you, Mayor. What's going on with all these other pieces of land here, like 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8 that were on your screen? Yeah. Are any of those developed currently?
Mayor Ortega, Councilmember Durham, those are each owned by adjacent owners. They do appear to have some bleed over of development from the yards of, say, 1 into 2 on this graphic, 9 into 8 on this graphic. 4 and 3 have a wall constructed around them and appear to be being used as a vehicle or storage enclosed area. They are owned by the adjacent property owner at the north end of the cul-de-sac here, and I believe they're being used for their personal storage. But none of the other properties are pursuing a development request at this point in time in the way that the applicant is.
So the lot number 4 is owned by the house to the west there?
Correct. I'm sort of circling it on the PowerPoint here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on with the applicant, please.
Mayor and members of council, my name is David Rickert. I may be familiar to some, maybe to others. I've actually stood here quite a few times, but I'm honored to be in front of you tonight. Whoever thought one small lot would be so problematic? So from that perspective, I'm going to add to what Mr. Barnes just laid out for you. And yes, we are moving to the Vice Mayor's idea through stipulations or conditions of approval. We believe that the use tied to the north and tied to the lot from the councilman's question is being used without a principal use on that property. So there are a lot of machinations going on. But with that, I'd like to introduce Anku, who is the architect, owner of the property, family man, Scottsdale resident, who wants to build a home on it. We have Tim Lesotho with us, who is talking about the legal matters of when the city's Board of Adjustment denied the application, they basically took away land use rights. And this gets down to the heart of the issue tonight. If you vote it down, there's no principal use you can establish on this property. It doesn't matter who owns it. And I know a lot of the neighbors a little contentious with us about that why did he buy it? From that perspective, he bought it to build a home for you. He built it in Scottsdale. You will see that it is a very well-designed home, an architect wanting to live in his own home. How about that? So, with that in mind, I just wanted to make a few comments here, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Koo, and then Tim will come up and add a little bit more about the legal perspective here. But the general plan allows for this to happen, the range of densities. Did in 2001 when I was here. It does in the new general plan, and if somebody felt like that needed to be changed, it should have been done this last year. During the time we were working on it. Didn't happen. Second thing is, your zoning ordinance is your toolkit to try to make things reasonable, manageable, and implement your general plan. You're down to the one tool you have left in that toolbox to actually put something meaningful on this site, a principal use. And what that means is you got to put a home on that property before you legally can do anything else with it. So with that, he's been through 4 years of trying to get other properties to work with him, to work to the point that it was a non-conforming lot in the first place, which suggests that it takes super, if you will, talent to try to put something together here. And I wanted to compliment the staff and the law department in working with us. They weren't coaching us, they were working with us, trying to figure out a solution here. And to their credit, we have a recommendation for approval. There were a few planning commissioners who believed the same thing I'm suggesting. At this point, we need one lot. The lot that never was built or was there before ADOT took the right-of-way. That home got destroyed by virtue of the freeway. There's still one home floating here. We're asking for it to be on this lot, and those other remnants in this particular area are not available to us. So with that, if I can turn it over to Mr. Koo to give you a brief presentation of his more in-depth analysis on this, and I'll be open for questions as well.
Hello, my name is Hoon Koo. I'm the lot owner and Scottsdale resident for nearly 20 years. I live in 12752 East Suaro Drive. It's right in front of Basis Scottsdale. All my kids went. I raised my two kids last 20 years. They all went to Basis Scottsdale. In fact, my young boy, he's becoming junior this fall. He's gonna grow and get out of the house. And I came across this lot a few years ago, January 2017, and we both, my wife and I both loved it. Especially my wife, it's closer to Costco. She doesn't have to drive very far. And I thought it was a great opportunity, and we can find a nice home here, and we don't have to move and losing all my friends the last 20 years here in Scottsdale. Last few years I've been working with my consultant and very courteous city staff. And just make the story short, we arrived at this conclusion. This application is more realistic with rezoning from R135 to R110, although this character and the size is more compatible and very comfortably within the range of R118. Just not pulling too much complicated strings. Probably we should isolate this the larger parcel of land and stay with the R10 application. This is a house view around the neighbors, and they are all built back in 1994 through 1997. Within 3 years, this subdivision developed by home builders. My lot, nearly 16,000 square foot, is well within the range of this neighborhood. In fact, there are a few houses that are even smaller than my lot. And these are the references I can refer to. By comparison, if I stay with the R35, the developable lot size becomes smaller. But even with the even R18 standard, the developable lot size becomes much larger. My immediate neighbor subdivision amended zoning standard can be realistically achievable. Although, again, my application is for the R10. And my target design, I initially thought this is a fun project using my background as an architect and play with new building technique and more environmentally and energy conscious materials to develop. And it turned out to be on the top kind of contemporary taste. However, it evolved, incorporating other neighbors and some other comments. I'm more than willing to entertain different style, such as more Mediterranean, Tuscany, or Spanish colonial, which is a very predominant housing style in the Southwest. And by the way, Walid Al-Mudi, he is my immediate neighbor. He is more toward the Tuscany style anyway. So instead of building a house that's eye-popping, can be very calm and compatible house. And I got his blessing as well as Mary Alton, Claudia Alton. They are my neighbors to the west. As Mr. Barn illustrated, I would rather respect the privacy of my surrounding neighbors, but I would like to enjoy the view of the mountain, which is toward the freeway side. So I would like to have some kind of deck while limiting the building height under the surrounding neighbors' building size, 21 feet. Again, I would like to play with the new building techniques and material. Other than common stucco house, something like the autoclaved, aerated concrete blocks, or the ICF, insulated concrete foam, and some other means and method. This is a front view approach, garage side, patio, and I have a second deck that has a window toward the freeway side. In summary, this lot is very comparable to all the surrounding neighbors' lots. It's not small. It's not dominantly bigger, but it's definitely within the range. And I'm more than happy to make the housing size compatible to the neighborhood as well. And having said that, there are some more complicated items which I cannot handle, so I engaged some more experienced, accountable professionals such as Tim Lasoda. So I would like to invite him to make some comments about the legal aspects of it, please.
Well, you have used your 10 minutes, and I will allow 1 minute, but then we have to go to public comment. And
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Thanks for the extra minute, so I'll make it really quick. But I don't think I need to say too much because we've tried to communicate this. This is an extremely unusual situation with this property. Obviously, the freeway was built. It ends up as just under about 2,000 square feet too short, too small for an R118, which the properties just to the west of it are. So it's just a hair under, and it's a remnant. And some of the things have been suggested about what should happen to it. But you can sell it. Well, if you can't do anything with it, who's going to buy it? You can buy someone else's property. Well, we don't have a right of private eminent domain in this state, so unless they're willing to sell, you can't. We went through Board of Adjustment, and they said no. The bottom line is, I think the law is clear. You don't have to allow any use, certainly, but you can't allow no use. And this is so close to the surrounding neighborhoods. When I was there, the only thing I saw was a squirrel on the property, vermin. So it's a little hard to understand why someone wouldn't want a nice house on a comparable lot size that's comparable to others. And we'd ask that you approve this rezoning request. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to public comment, and it's my understanding that we have several, so let me begin with, let's see, Jim Rohn and then Nan Curie.
My name is Jim Rohn. I live at 8601 East Sutton Drive, 2 blocks south of this property. The Planning Commission has voted 5-2 to deny this. The neighbors are in opposition of it. Why somebody bought a piece of property that wasn't usable in the first place is subject to debate. It might have been a good deal, an investment. I don't know. Unfortunately, people that are in that situation, investors, seem to think that they can buy something with one zoning and, it'll be okay. We'll just get it rezoned. Let's hire some bigwigs, some people that you all know, and we'll get our way. Let's go back to the Planning Commission. They denied it 5-2. I request that you deny it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Nan Curie, and then Rob Mangini.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council members and Vice Mayor. I'm disappointed to hear them present it that there are other properties nearby that are around the same size. And our current zoning, as we've gone over, is an R135, requires a minimum of 35,000 square feet with a limitation of one dwelling and results in a low density of population. The proposed rezone to R110 allows for one dwelling per 10,000 square feet, plus permits a higher density of population. Approval of the applicant's request will instantly set a dangerous precedence that will pave the way for developers to acquire, split, and build multiple dwellings on lots in our neighborhood where there is now only one dwelling. The lot of configuration poses several limitations to what can be built, resulting in an odd structure that will not be commensurate with the neighborhood. Number one, the application proposes to build a two-story. Yes, on a certain segment you revised it, but there are no two stories in existence. The CC&Rs do not allow a two-story building. It will be only one home in the neighborhood built on a flag lot. A sensitive water retention basin blocks the entrance of the site, and the applicant proposes to build a bridge over this basin in community where no bridge exists. This lot provides for 0 street frontage. Guests would have to park on this bridge or in front of another neighbor's home. The front door of this proposed home will not be visible from the street. The issue that the neighbors have is that we're concerned that if this passes, then we will have other lots, once they are sold, divvied up into 3 parcels. My home included. I live on 8618 East Voltaire Avenue, which is in the 2nd development of the McDowell Shadows Estates. He is located in the 4th development. But again, the CC&Rs do not allow for a 2-story building. I hope that you will not pass this, because it is going to destroy our neighborhood and increase the density and the noise factor. We have several VRBOs in the neighborhood now. My concern is that this will be a VRBO. Please help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Rob Mangini, and I believe he's the final speaker on this item.
Hello, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council. I've lived in this neighborhood since 2003. I'm here to support my neighbor and stand behind my fellow neighbors. The gentleman I'm supporting is Mark Sabino, and Mark's email is in all of your inboxes, and he's professionally communicated with everybody across this whole process in sort of a tough situation. And I hear a lot of professionals being hired that are very good at their job and very good at how they are presenting things and do things. But as somebody that lives in the neighborhood, it's simple. This is a square peg in a round hole. And I urge you to please do the right thing. Help us out. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. Therefore, I will close public comment. At this point, we're open to discussion. If there are any questions, or then open to a motion. I see Councilmember Milhaven.
Thank you. Gee, I spent a lot of time on this for one small lot. I think we all have. So as I see this is a request to build a single-family home in a single-family neighborhood, right? And as I understand the process, so if this gentleman comes through to build a house, the staff pulls out the zoning code, looks at the existing zoning of R135, and goes down the list and says, check, 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 does it comply with the zoning code? So the first is the lot 35,000 square feet? The answer is no. So that means that we stop there and nothing can be built. So it requires that it be a different zoning code so it can be in compliance. And I think we saw tonight that given the size of the lot, R110 is what's appropriate to allow him to build something. So my understanding is that this is a 13,000 square foot lot, and it sounds like by the time they add that wedge, which gives them street access, it's getting closer to 16,000 square feet, which is consistent with where the neighborhood is at R118. So it seems that while I'm very sensitive, and I don't live too far from here myself, the neighbors are very sensitive about context. It seems to me this is in keeping with the neighborhood. It is one single-family home in a single-family neighborhood. Now, I hear folks saying we don't have any 2-story homes in our neighborhood. My neighborhood doesn't have 2-story homes either, and somebody came along and wanted to make a 2-story home, and it was already allowed by the zoning, as is allowed here. My neighbors didn't like it either, but it was already allowed, and the R135 already allows them to go to 30 feet, so they're stipulating to not more than 21 feet, and so that is may not be consistent with the adjoining homes, but it's certainly consistent with what the existing zoning would allow. The other thing that's interesting is in listening, because I did go back and listen to planning and hear what the neighbors' concerns were as well. You know, on the one hand, folks say that it wouldn't be consistent, and yet they say we can't see it from the street. So if it's a single-family home, if the aesthetics are of concern, people are saying they can't see it from the street. When I look at then the other ways that it's different from R135 from the 118 is it's a difference of a 5 foot on the front setback and a difference of 3 feet on the side setback. And so if you can't see it from the street, even that difference wouldn't make a difference. I do hear people talking about this would set a precedent, and I don't think that that's the case. I think that we consider each request on its own merit. It wouldn't mean that we would necessarily approve a future lot split or not approve a future lot split. I think each on its own merit. So I think that while we could argue to say, should they have known the zoning wasn't appropriate, I think that, but here we are as a neighborhood better with it as an empty lot. I don't think so. It's a request to build a single-family home in a single-family neighborhood. So I'm going to go ahead and support this, and I'm going to make a motion to approve, let me find the exact wording, adopt ordinance 4531 approving a zoning district map amendment from single-family residential R135 to single-family residential R110.
Vice Mayor Caputi.
Can I ask a question, or are we motioning first? How does that work? I always get confused.
You either, there's a motion, there's no second so far. So,
I just had a couple of questions for staff, but we can finish with the motioning first.
well, then we will, there's no second on the motion, it dies. Continue with your conversation.
Okay, so this, man, this is so complicated for such a little tiny spot. This idea of there being a precedent, I do think we should talk about this. Mr. Barnes, could you, I don't see how this would set a precedent necessarily, because this is such a unique situation, but the neighbors do seem very concerned that suddenly someone will say, we want to put 3 houses on our 35,000 square feet, and can you just explain how that would be super complicated? That's my understanding.
Vice Mayor, the best answer I can probably give, which I think echoes what Councilmember Milhaven had identified, is that a rezoning request comes through this same process, and so if the concern is that other properties will come in for a different zoning district that may allow them smaller lot area and be divided, they would still come through you first for evaluation through the Planning Commission, through us prior to that, but ultimately through you to evaluate the specifics, the details, the compatibility of that, each unique request and the potential outcomes of that request.
If we don't approve this project tonight, what happens to this tiny little piece of 10 or 15,000 square feet of nothing?
Vice Mayor, in staff's analysis, the end goal that they're trying to achieve can't be achieved. It can't be combined with the parcel next to it that gives it access, and it's substandard to the zoning that it has.
And so the thing that I keep struggling with is if we don't approve it, we're just going to have a little remnant parcel with nothing on it, and who maintains that? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and the best
again,
answer I think I can give is it is owned by Mr. Koo, and he was responsible for maintenance on it as the owner, but
he doesn't have
but
he can't do anything, so he's really just going to have an open, small lot that doesn't configure to anything, and he's going to have to, mow the lawn forever and not be able to actually do anything, nor sell it, right? Because if you can't build anything on it, there's really no value. It's kind of a quandary. City Attorney, can you have a property that has no use?
Mayor and Vice Mayor Caputi. So the issue with this property is, as they've explained to you, it was subdivided without going through the normal process. And so this applicant, who I have great sensitivity for, has purchased a property that doesn't meet the zoning. So in order to build, because he's purchased a property with this problem, he's either going to have to get a variance or get a rezoning. Those are his options. He could potentially assemble property. It looks like they've looked at that, and that's not possible. So if the council denies this zoning case tonight, I'll probably be suggesting this applicant to go back to the Board of Adjustment, because it was several years ago, and not this applicant, as I understand it, that went to the Board of Adjustment. So it's hard to say, well, what happens if the council says no to this zoning application, right? But I'm certainly not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be very difficult to figure out what happens next.
Right, and again, we're trying to balance the needs of the neighbors, of course, but what neighbor would really want a derelict property next to them either, right? I mean, at least if they build the property, you'd get some sound buffer from the freeway, and something would be there. But anyway, thank you. Still confused.
Okay, I see no other hands to speak, no other questions. The outline of our situation tonight, as I read it, is that there was an illegal subdivision of property, and that resulted in remnants that are less than desirable. And I have a problem with spot zoning. I have a problem with zoning which would reward perhaps a illegal lot splits in the future, or encourage them. That might cause us a problem. It becomes our problem because some illegal lot splits were made in the past. Ideally, if again it becomes a policy decision, I'm generally not in favor of spot zoning, of going with the remnant way beyond what the good judgment would allow. And I say that because there's also lot number 4, which is owned separately, and that lot is the dimensions of a R17. So again, having somebody purport to say, well, gee, I have a lot and it just fits lot R17, therefore give it to me. And I just don't think that from a policy standpoint, I can go down that road. That's kind of where I see the facts coming. And there's several things I certainly do agree with. Obviously, if this is a single-family neighborhood with aesthetic, it's unfortunate that lot 4 and lot 6 were not together, because then it would have been R118, right? Would have been an easier decision on my part in a more compatible situation. So that's my general feeling. We're still open for a motion or a second on the action as posted. And I see Councilwoman Janik.
I'd like to make a motion to deny the request for the rezoning at 13647 North 87th Street, 10 ZN 2021, ordinance number 4531.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, please register your vote. Okay, the motion was deny. It does carry. And we're going to move on to the next item on the regular agenda. Oh, Councilmember Durham, did you have your hand up for, sorry, I see a.
You've already told me.
I do apologize. I try to keep track. Okay. We're going to move on to item number 21. Item number 21 is the artisan and zoning case 3ZN 2021 and 3DA 2021. At the request of the applicant, there was a request to continue this item as a courtesy and as provided by our rules. That is possible. Sometimes we do make sure that the public knows in advance when possible, and I believe there was a few days' notice on this. So do I have any comment or motion on item number 21?
I will make a motion to continue item number 21 until the next meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, and just for clarification, that was a date, I believe, on May 3rd. Is that correct? Okay, May 3rd, 2022. Any discussion? Seeing none, please register your vote. Yes. Thank you. Motion passes. We'll see you then. Next, we have item number 22, which is part of the 2022 Transportation Action Plan. We have before us a resolution to adopt the Transportation Action Plan dated April 11th, and I want to be sure that we have the latest revisions in our hands. So proceed. The presenter is David Meinhardt.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I'm Dave Meinhardt, Transportation Planning Manager for the city. And tonight, as the Mayor mentioned, we'll be asking you to consider the adoption of Resolution 12434, which would adopt the 2022 Transportation Action Plan. Before going into this, we'll note that we did have a study session on this topic back in February. We had agendized this for council consideration earlier in April based on some requests for additional clarifications. We tabled that item and have now brought it back with you tonight. So my presentation tonight is going to focus on those additional clarifications that were made at the request of council. But just for some background, the Transportation Action Plan is coordinated with the approved General Plan 2035, which focuses on trying to improve the balance of our transportation system and the connectivity of that system. By balance, I mean a balance between automobile travel, pedestrian travel, bicycle, transit, equestrian. This plan will replace the currently approved 2016 Transportation Master Plan. We focus on primarily a 10-year refinement of the existing transportation system. Examples include street classification changes that reflect the actual travel demand trends that we've seen over 20 years and more. And as we've talked about on this particular concept and plan for almost a year and a half now, that we really want to emphasize the focus on livable streets and livable communities over rapid traffic throughput. And that's been a consistent touch point on the development of this plan. And we've worked very closely with the Transportation Commission in that development. The plan includes goals and policies in each of the elements, also performance measures that we'll be tracking and posting those in an online dashboard as we go forward. It has 5 key elements: the streets, transit, bikeways, pedestrians, and trails. And we also have an implementation section which helps us to prioritize the use of our revenues in development of new capital improvement projects and transportation programs. Just a brief overview of the public input process that we went through in developing this plan. 9 separate Transportation Commission meetings dating from January of 2021 through December of 2021, when the Transportation Commission did unanimously recommend approval of this plan by the City Council. During the development of the plan, we issued an online questionnaire in August and September of 2021. We had over 200 responses to that particular online questionnaire. It asked a number of questions that tied into the thought process in developing this plan. We conducted a virtual open house from October 18th through October 31st of 2021 with over 180 users, all done on the web. Staff did recordings of overviews of the various transportation elements as part of that. We put together a web page on the city's website, which, as the development of this particular presentation, had over 2,200 page landings, and we had over 500 comments submitted. We have received an additional 28 comments, I believe, in the last 2 days regarding the plan. Again, I'm going to just focus on the updates that we've made since the submittal packet was put together for the April 5th meeting. And those focus on 6 areas. The first is related to 128th Street in that section that was brought up earlier by Councilwoman Littlefield, where that alignment crosses what's referred to as the gooseneck of the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve, a 3/4 mile long stretch from just north of Ranch Gate Road, roughly 1/4 mile north of Ranch Gate Road, up to the Joe Max Road alignment, about 3/4 miles in length in total. Just to make sure that we've fully covered all the ways that particular alignment, changing it to the recommendation coming out of council, or the guidance given by council in study session in a consensus fashion, to convert that from a planned minor collector roadway to a emergency access only roadway across the preserve. We've made several updates to the draft, or to the proposed plan. That includes the street classification table, where we list all the different changes that are being proposed as part of the plan, which was on page S7 of the plan plan itself. Changing the functional classification map, which is on page S8, to remove 128th Street across the preserve as a minor collector, and noting on the map that this segment is for emergency access only. We also revised the planned right-of-way widths map, which is a new feature of this particular plan, on page S12 to again address the issue across the preserve. There were also a few modifications needed within the bikeways element to reflect this direction, and that is to modify a map on page B6 for existing and planned shared use paths, which did show a paved path along the east side of the 128th Street corridor in this location, and also change to the future network map, functional classification map for page B9. Sorry, that's a typo. It's in the future bike path map. And just to kind of highlight what this means from the standpoint, the functional classification map is our primary guideline that we use for planning future roadway improvements, as well as providing information to citizens and businesses regarding expectations with the number of lanes that we'd have on various roads. We did change our map for that section of the 128th Street and zoomed in to the right here, where you have the gooseneck across the preserve, removing the minor collector, no center lane designation in that section, and noting clearly that it is for emergency access only. A few other modifications that we've made in response to the additional comments ahead of the April 5th meeting in the bikeway element. We had a goal 3 that combined 2 different concepts, and we've broken that into 2 separate goals. Goal 3 just states to expand the network of on-street and off-street bike facilities to increase the amount of biking for all trip purposes. That was the version that was in your draft that came to you in your study session. And we've now broken out a new goal 4, which is to provide access to shared use path within a half mile of all residences, unless privately owned property or natural terrain make it impractical. Also, based on feedback from the transportation, from the study session, as well as from council comments regarding the April 5th submittal, we've modified street element goal number 5 on page S3 to say minimize heat island effects by reducing existing pavement where traffic demand is less than previously planned, and experimenting with paving technologies, and the new language we added, including consideration of cool or white pavement that supports sustainability or reduced daytime heat absorption and nighttime heat radiation. In the bikeways section, we added additional clarification for circumstances where we look at reducing the number of lanes on a road and how that might happen with striping. To state on page B3 that most bikeway system improvements resulting from travel lane reductions, which would be part of street classification changes, would occur through striping changes coordinated with the pavement surface treatment cycle, which usually follows a time frame of approximately 7 to 10 years, meaning if you do that treatment, you change the striping, typically within 7 to 10 years, if we need to look at reassessing that striping, that would be the normal time that we would do it. Curb placements, this is a very important item, will not change, and right-of-way widths will not be reduced from those shown in figure S8, which is that street right-of-way widths map, unless directed by the City Council. Again, the changes, modifications we make to the roadways, if the classifications are reduced, say from a minor arterial to a minor collector, 4 lanes, 2 lanes, that would be done only with a striping approach rather than with a construction project that would move curb lanes unless the City Council approved that as a capital improvement project. For those corridors where we would look at those types of changes and it might affect, there may be a transit route on that alignment, it wouldn't change anything with where the existing placement of bus stops and bus shelters are currently. And we did also mention that we will notify neighborhoods of changes in travel configurations that would be done with the striping projects and repaving. And that would be done through a combination of signage, electronic communications, and where needed through in-person meetings. Next up, our clarification that we made in the implementation program section. We had some questions regarding Mountain View Road between 92nd Street and 96th Street and what the long-range capital plan might be for that. We've updated the text for that project description to state we provide creative solutions to improve traffic, pedestrian, and bicycling mobility. This would be in this half-mile segment. And any addition of travel lanes would require reclassification of the roadway by City Council. And one additional clarification we made in the discussion of bus rapid transit evaluation guidance. On page T3 in the transit section, we've revised the text to state we'd evaluate the feasibility of and potential implementation of an on-street BRT route on Scottsdale Road from the Thunderbird Park and Ride to Chandler. Use of dedicated lanes, while not anticipated, would be subject to review and approval by City Council. That's only, we would only get to that level if there was an evaluation that suggested that that should be under consideration, but it would not go anywhere without City Council approval. That is the extent of my presentation. And again, the action requested would be that Council adopt resolution number 12434, adopting the 2022 Transportation Action Plan. Happy to answer any questions. Mark Melnichenko, our Director of Transportation and Streets, is also here to help answer any questions that may come up.
I see. At this point, we are also obligated to open public comment. So we will go ahead with Councilmember Durham and any question about your presentation, and then go to public comment, and then come back for action. Councilmember Durham, and then Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. At least I have received a number of emails in the last few days about the reduction of lanes on the southern piece of Hayden. And I believe it was in your report that was justified by showing the reduction of traffic which has taken place over the years. And that reduction of traffic primarily comes from the creation of the 101, which diverted traffic off of Hayden. So if you could comment on that, the reduction of the traffic and the reason for cutting out some of the lanes on Hayden. I would appreciate it.
Certainly, Councilman Durham, Mayor Ortega, members of council. The southern 3 miles of Hayden Road from McKellips to Indian School Road are is the only part of the Hayden Road corridor that, at this point, that we are looking at the potential of changing the classification from minor arterial 6-lane roadway from major arterial, to minor arterial 4-lane roadway. As you mentioned, Councilman Durham, the traffic volumes on Hayden Road are about 40% less than they were before the freeway was opened. They're trending in the mid 20,000 range to the very low 30,000 range, which is very much within the capabilities of a 4-lane roadway to handle. Again, on that corridor, we would not be proposing, if we did make a change in the number of travel lanes, that we would move curbs. We would basically have some sort of a configuration. It could be a bike lane with a buffer. It could be a bike and bus lane potentially, because we do have regular transit service on that corridor. It would also give us opportunities to add turn bays, right turn bays where they don't currently exist, which is one of the primary things that we look at to try to improve traffic flow on our streets and also improve safety. There are actually 8 potential turn bay locations at signalized intersections in that 3-mile section. And there's at least 10 locations with entryways into neighborhoods that we could potentially also add right turn bays. So yeah, it's not something we take lightly. I also looked at what the travel volumes have been over the last several years in most recent counts, and looked at what that capacity would be at 4 lanes and compared that to a typical, the volumes versus typical 4-lane capacity. And it still is only about 3/4 at 4 lanes of what we would expect as transportation planners and traffic engineers that a 4-lane roadway could manage. And when you add in turn bays in particular, that makes it even more efficient for what you can pass through in those corridors. Thank you.
Mr. Meinert, I have a couple comments, and then Councilwoman Janik. Could you just clarify for me the hierarchy of the stand-up scooter bikes and the e-bike, and why am I seeing so many e-bikes basically on pedestrian sidewalks, and yet others are more daring and they're just barreling down? So can you explain that part to me, and then also, well, go ahead, start with that.
Mayor, members of council, electric-powered bikes are allowed for use in the city of Scottsdale. Versions that can assist with pedaling up to 20 miles an hour can be used on our path system and on sidewalks where cycling is not prohibited. The same thing with electric scooters. Bikes that can go faster than 20 miles an hour are restricted to use on street only. Our bike lanes are used by e-bikes, some electric scooters, and then many human-propelled bikes as well are using them on a regular basis. But as long as the bikes or the types of vehicles can travel at 20 miles an hour or less with assistance, they are allowed on not only the bike lanes but also our paths.
So there's a governor on it to keep it from going over that speed? I mean, I see different people darting in and out, and it concerns me. Of course, no helmets either. If typically the e-bikes are owner-owned and owner-driven, but the others are just kind of pick up and ride. I've also seen 2 people on the stand-up scooters, and that also bothers us.
Mayor Ortega, members of council, the scooters that the companies rent do have controls on the speeds.
Okay.
And they can adjust those, and they can do all sorts of fancy things with terms like geofencing, where they can block them from going into certain areas. So there are some levels of control on them. Not all those scooters are being rented. I imagine some have been designed to go faster than the speeds I mentioned, but In general, we see much more on our streets are in the bike lanes are bicycles, whether they're human-powered entirely or a combination of human power and electric power. And those also have controls over how fast they can go.
So then, again, I'm hearing that you're not asking, or this does not allow curb demolition and narrowing of the streets with this overall document, but prefers a striping in terms of handling that. Is that what I hear, other than 128th, where we only have that one for emergency use? Is that correct?
Mayor, yes, as I mentioned, if there were a situation, and there are some of our streets where you could certainly state a good case for moving curbs over time, because you may have a street right now that's got 4 lanes that could handle 30,000+ cars a day. We have examples that are under 2,000 cars a day. But because the cost of that level of change is so significant, it would not happen without first being proposed as a capital project, going through all the review process through City Council, and then the standard public output or input process that we do on all of our projects. So what we're looking at is a primary approach here is that we try to repurpose some of our roadway space in the most efficient way that we can, and that would be through changing the striping when the project or when those corridors come in for a resurfacing treatment. I will mention that the number of lane miles that we have in this plan to potentially modify or reduce is about 3.6% of the 1,061 total lane miles we have in our classified street system of minor collectors and larger. It's a little under 38 miles out of over 1,060.
Okay, and I just want to keep tabs of what's, we have 3 council to speak, but also I was looking in case there was any public comment. So just to be clear, there is no public comment. None has been received. We're continuing with our discussion. Councilwoman Janik, Councilwoman Whitehead.
I do have a question for you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. On page B3, the last paragraph, most bikeway system improvements resulting from travel lane reductions would occur through a striping change, which you did a very good job of explaining, which follows a time frame of approximately 7 to 10 years. What I would like explained is, are you saying to complete all the striping is 7 to 10 years, or are you saying it will start in 7 to 10 years?
Mayor Ortega, Councilman Janik, yes, I guess our wording would clarify, because I don't mean either of those. What the 7 to 10 years refers to is if we go in and do a pavement treatment,
okay,
it would be there's various levels that occur. That when we would do that pavement treatment, that would, if a segment had been recommended to have a change in its configuration, that's when we would do it. We have a 5-year paving program, but it doesn't cover every street in the city. But when we do a treatment and if we were to put down new striping, it would typically, if we waited until the next treatment to change the striping, that would be the 7 to 10 years. Now, there are ways that you can make adjustments sooner if we really blew it, but the corridors that we're talking about, it's unlikely that we would have any significant change in conditions in less than 7 to 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Whitehead, then Vice Mayor Caputi, and Councilwoman Littlefield. Councilwoman Whitehead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meinhardt. I just want to thank you and Mr. Melnichek. So I know transportation action plans don't sound that exciting, but they have such a powerful impact on our community. And so the work study session, we were up till 10 p.m. at night working on this, and then a lot of back and forth. And definitely this is the third I guess, the third edition, and it's really a powerful and good edition. I'm very pleased with this. I do have a question. On the sidewalk that we're considering, the missing link on 68th Street, is that something we should try to add into this, or after it's reviewed, do we just amend the TAP to put it in? What's the best way to handle that?
Mayor Ortega, Councilman Whitehead, we already have a identified project in the implementation program for the 68th Street corridor. We tried to be fairly broad in our descriptions of those projects. It's called the 68th Street Active Transportation Corridor, right. But its primary emphasis is to improve the pedestrian environment in the entire 68th Street corridor. We didn't intentionally prioritize projects here because things change and issues come up and they need to be addressed. But certainly when we have a corridor that the primary recommendation is to improve the pedestrian environment, where you're going to focus first is on sections of that corridor where you currently don't have one. So from that standpoint, I believe it is very well covered as a concept within the TAP, and the plan, as speakers mentioned earlier, the objectives of the plan support that as well.
Okay, so good. So we don't need to, because I think I remembered in the first round, it was 68th Street north of Calabac. You're saying we don't need to make any edits as we move forward. It'll be, that can be part of what we have.
Yes.
Okay, recognizing we need, the funding and all the other.
Yes, we would just need to look at how we would approach a proposal regarding an actual capital project to start implementing portions of that corridor.
Okay. So I do want to go through, because we have had a lot of input, and some of the input we got, gosh, right after the first work study session, so I want to remind everybody of that as well. So I want to talk about what this plan does, because there is a lot of misinformation about what is in this plan. So first of all, and really very importantly to me, this plan, this is 4 years in the making. When we approve this plan, we honor 25 years of preserve activism. So when the preserve was created, we envisioned that we needed to connect north and south, and we envisioned the 128th alignment, which predated the preserve, which was no longer needed. We just took 30,000 acres out of home production. So this is a crucial wildlife corridor. And along the way, it got designated as a four-lane road. So in this plan, when we vote yes, we protect the preserve, as many of us have worked on for many decades. We protect taxpayers. Anybody who's been out there to build this road, it would be very expensive, and it would be funded by Scottsdale taxpayers, and it would benefit high-density development that I think is inappropriate in Rio Verde, and most residents in Scottsdale absolutely oppose. So we would be paying for infrastructure that enables that which we don't want and which I think is inappropriate. I want to switch over to the Shea Corridor. There's been a lot of discussion about that Shea Corridor. It's fairly built out. There's some areas that remain to be built. There was a proposal to widen Mountain View Road to 4 lanes. I want to talk about Mountain View. It's 2 lanes. It's got trees on both sides, big sidewalks. Unlike Shea and unlike Via Linda in these sections, this is the pedestrian-friendly corridor. This is where you can bike to the Greenbelt and bike to the restaurants and stores. So thank you, staff. This would cost taxpayer dollars, and again, it creates more volume on roads, which could justify more density that I heard loud and clear the residents of Scottsdale Ranch, the residents of McCormick Ranch, and the residents all around the area don't want. So we're saving tax dollars, we're protecting trees, we're keeping a pedestrian corridor safe, and I am just thrilled with that. So thank you for that change. And I just want to remind everybody, we did get about 50 emails saying, don't you dare widen Mountain View Road, but those got forgotten over the last few weeks. So there was a big response to that proposal. What else are we doing? We're protecting law-abiding drivers. And the transportation staff has been really good about that. When we restripe roads, it's not to hurt you and me and all the rest of us who are just driving or kids learning or some of our grandparents that might need, to go a little slower. We're just repainting the roads to make it so it's more amenable for the law-abiding drivers. One of the biggest complaints I get, and it costs us money in police enforcement, is we've had an upsurge in speeding. So this plan actually incentivizes people to not break the law. I'm excited about the component that was added by the mayor to consider heat mitigation as part of our transportation plan. And I just want to state what this plan does not do. There is some misinformation. It does not include bus rapid transit in Scottsdale. That's something every municipality looks at periodically, and we will too, but it does not include that. And let me see. Yeah, I just think it's an excellent plan, and I will make a motion. I know there's other speakers, so I think I'll wait for them, but I definitely strongly supportive. I appreciate so much community input. Again, on that preserve, protecting the preserve, that was a lot of us, and all the other changes to make our city safer for both drivers, pedestrians, and for wildlife. So thank you, staff, and the community for all your work.
Vice Mayor Caputi, and then Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, I'm going to reiterate something that Councilwoman White had just said. So in the past few days, we've all been flooded by folks who are having misconceptions about this plan, and I think Councilman Durham pointed it out as well. And so I just want to make sure that people listening are clear that we are planning out 10 years, and we are not attacking cars. We are thoughtfully balancing, moving our city forward, and I think you mentioned that Hayden Road section is the only section that was having traffic less than, it was under what was anticipated, right? So that one's going to be reclassified, but that's really all we're talking about. And I think making roads more efficient, doing things like restriping, and I wrote down that you said only 3.6% lane miles were even impacted by any sort of changes per se. So I want the folks watching at home to understand that we're not taking away your roads. We are planning very thoughtfully, and we look out 10 years, and we understand the future of traffic impacts and what needs to happen to make sure people get where they need to go in our city, whether it's by car, foot, bike, e-bike, whatever mode of transportation that people are comfortable using. Our goal here is to give you a transportation plan that gets you where you need to go. So, no question, I just want to reiterate that because there does seem to be a lot of misinformation out there. Thank you.
Councilwoman Littlefield.
Well, there's always one in every crowd. And that's me. I'm sorry, I do not like this plan at all. There's some parts of it that are fine, and I'm going to name those also. The white pavement usage, I'm very good with that as long as it doesn't glare or reflect in the sun. That's great. Locating shade trees to provide more shade for pedestrians on hot summer days makes perfect sense to me. We should be doing that now, and if we're not, then definitely that should be part of any kind of plan we put together. Kudos for reclassifying 128th Street where it crosses the preserve and is indeed part of the preserve, and it is only emergency access, and that should never be paved. So that should be very clear in there. And I think actually there is, in the consent agenda item number 6, which we passed tonight, it mentioned it not as emergency access only, and that probably has to have an addendum or a note or something saying that 128th Street is relabeled. I am concerned very much on the narrow streets. I'm concerned with the paragraph under the caption of planning smarter. I have a problem taking from an already familiar street and road and changing them because now we know better. In general, any roadway that you now believe needs to be reduced, narrowed, or diminished in any way should go back to the citizens for their approval. And the reason I believe that is to narrow down the current roads is a diminishment of that road, whether it's striping or any other manner. And I believe it could increase the danger to people who are used to traveling and driving on the roads as they currently exist. So we need to make sure that people are aware of that change, because they'll get in their cars and they'll drive and expect the road to be the road that they're used to having. And also, traffic growth may be less than what you thought it would be going forward, but it has still grown over the past 20 years. And it will continue to grow more and more as already approved apartments are built. We have 10,000 that have been approved already that have not yet been built. They're going to add cars to our roads. And those cars will increase traffic. Overall, Scottsdale citizens' average age is older than most cities, and they are also very car-oriented. They want the freedom of movement an automobile gives them. Even most of those who ride bikes a lot still have a car and use it. We are a very long and a very narrow city where long roads play a vital role. Scottsdale citizens want their cars. They want to be able to drive their cars, and they want to do it safely and in the comfort and convenience of their cars. Many like to bike, many like to walk, especially in good weather, not so much in the summer. But cars are the mainstay of transportation in most of our city and for most of the people that live here. Most folks want it that way. They call it freedom, freedom of action, freedom of movement, and freedom of our time. We're used to it, and we want it, and there's really no reason why we shouldn't have it. To narrow down the roads in order to create bike lanes is not beneficial to many citizens who drive but do not ride bikes and cannot walk long distances. We have many such citizens in Scottsdale, nor is it beneficial to many of the older citizens who are used to the roads being wider and drive accordingly. I think it's dangerous for both drivers and bike riders to change the width of the road, whether you do it physically or by paint. And I do not agree with doing this throughout the city. As for bus stops, I spent all week reading this thing, guys, so I know exactly what this thing says. Your information on the bus stops and how we plan for them is fine. I understand, however, that we currently have issues with folks living in the bus stops and creating some real problems there. I saw nothing on how we're going to work to fix these kinds of issues, and I would assume that the more bus stops we have, the more problems we will have. I think there needs to be some consideration of possible fixes on that. While I agree the bus stops need to be clean, reliable, and comfortable, I think we should also consider they need to be safe. And that goes for the buses themselves also. I saw very little about that kind of safety in this plan. The Thunderbird Park and Ride at Scottsdale Road and Thunderbird is usually empty 24/7. In all the years I've lived near it, and I've been there for a long, long time, just about since it was built, I think I've seen 3 or 4 cars go through it. If you can use it as a connection point to a regular service to the Arabian Library or the McDowell Aquatic Center or something like that, that might be a good place to start if such a service is needed. I'm not sure it is, and I know of no studies to determine that kind of need. People usually drive to those places, and then they drive home. I liked the idea of parking there for special events, for Westworld and the Phoenix Open and other situations like that, but I'm not sure that that's enough to pay for the cost of having a parking location on the city rolls. If those things don't work, or we can't find alternatives for its use, I suggest we close it down and sell the land. It's currently a total waste of taxpayer money. If you don't want to close it down, you might consider it as a possible location for charging stations for our buses and auto fleets, or even for the general public, or to build storage for some of the city fleet that works in the north part of town. But if we can't get it to pay for itself on an operational basis, it should be shut down and sold. In today's world, I think you need to consider very carefully the idea of increasing bus service that is not currently used very often. To keep what we have, if it is being utilized, but very careful about increasing any system that brings strangers into neighborhoods. In today's world, safety is at the top of everyone's mind, and it would be better for buses to take people to businesses and shopping centers than into neighborhoods. By and large, we are an older community than many cities, and in our long and narrow city, many do not see bikes as a practical alternative for shopping, going to the doctors, or grocery stores, or just plain getting around. The distances are too large for many people. They do not like, they are very concerned, of keeping the roadways open, as am I, and safe to both bicycles and automobile traffic. So be careful how you narrow those roads. People are used to wide, safe lanes with space on each side. Even with this, we have tremendous accidents sometimes fatal ones. My main concern here is safety for pedestrians, for bikers, and for motorists alike. I believe that by narrowing the roads, we increase the chance of serious accidents and possible death. Another safety issue I think needs more consideration is the idea of, and I quote, because I couldn't remember all this, reducing the length of continuous perimeter walls to encourage pedestrian connectivity to collector and aerial streets and shared use paths and transit connections, unquote. In today's world of safety concerns, I do not believe most people want to encourage pedestrian connectivity through their neighborhoods, especially at night. That's why they have the walls up there in the first place. And again, safety takes a higher priority, especially now. I do not approve of making spaces in neighborhood walls for people to wander through in the middle of the night. I agree with having intelligent transportation, traffic signals, streetlights, that portion of this. Again, it's a matter of safety, and that makes perfect sense. And finally, I totally 100% disagree with the BRT lanes in Scottsdale. Citizens have voiced their opposition to light rail and have made it very clear they do not want this kind of lane monopoly use on Scottsdale Road. A dedicated BRT lane is simply a bad plan for our already overcrowded downtown. I can think of nothing that would make people more upset than this, other than light rail itself. This is a substitute for light rail. Rapid transit that would take a dedicated lane off Scottsdale Road for the general public's use, my guess is to satisfy and expand the Bar District, would have much the same effect as light rail would to our downtown. We have heard time and time again from our businesses throughout the downtown area that they do not want this kind of monopoly of our streets. If it stays in this plan for Scottsdale Road, already one of our most crowded and used streets in the entire city, both by cars and pedestrians and bikes, I cannot support it. It is a deal breaker for me. In general, and Scottsdale citizens want roads and parking facilities to fulfill their transportation needs, not ours. They do not want bus rapid transit, and it is taking a dedicated lane, according to this. It would clog the road lanes and slow the automobile's ability to get around. And that's what this plan would do. I can't support that. People have the right to travel. It simply makes it harder for people to depend on their cars to travel in the city to accomplish their business. For me, the BRT mass transit, along with mass controls of people's movements, is not a goal. Our goal should be how to make traveling in Scottsdale easier for people, more comfortable and safer. Neither narrowing the car lanes nor choking off a car lane in Scottsdale Road in downtown accomplishes either of those goals. Open, wider streets with better signage and simple directions for parking facilities and local businesses does. Thank you.
Next, we have Councilwoman Janik.
I'll make it short and sweet. First of all, my overview. You did a very thorough job on this plan. Thank you to the Transportation Department. It was well organized. The maps, the tables, and the diagrams make it very understandable. All the explanations were very clear. And I like the fact that one of your focuses, that your main focus is on preserve what we have and maintain it. I think that's wonderful that we're at that stage in the development of the city. I know there's controversial issues. I know that on page S7, the reduction in street capacity, I realize that's controversial, got a ton of emails on it. I'm a little concerned about Hayden, Drinkwater, and Goldwater, the couplet. And all I ask, and I think you already agreed to it, is you do robust engagement of businesses and citizens, and that you use the most up-to-date traffic information before you do the conversion. I thought that it was very good that you clarified on page T11 that the bus rapid transit, if it ever became an issue, that it would come back to City Council to vote on. So thank you for all that work. I do intend to support the plan, and I would like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 12434, approving the 2022 Transportation Action Plan.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote. Um, 6-1 passed. Next, we'll go to item number 23, proposed fiscal year 2022-23 operating budget and capital improvement plan. Sonia Andrews, City Treasurer, and Dan Worth, Public Works Director. We will also receive public comment on this presentation after the presentation. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. This is our presentation for the proposed 22-23 budget and capital improvement plan. I will be, next slide, please. I will be providing a high-level overview of the proposed budget, and Dan Worth will be providing an overview of the capital improvement plan. We also have Analia Johnson, our budget administrator, here to help answer any detailed budget questions if you have any. Next slide. The budget adoption process begins with tonight's presentation. Then on May 17th, Council will be asked to adopt the tentative budget and CIP, and also the rates and fees for fiscal year 22-23. On June 7th, Council will be asked to adopt the final budget and CIP, and finally on June 21st is the adoption of our property tax levies. Next slide. The budget is a critical operating plan and financial plan for the city. It takes months to put together. It involves all departments in the city with a lot of review and refining and direction from the city manager to arrive at what is in front of you tonight. So I'd like to take a moment here to thank all the departments for their input into the budget, the city manager for his direction, and I'd like to give special recognition to our budget director, Judy Doyle, who is here with us tonight, and also the budget department for all the efforts they put together in producing this budget. Next slide. The proposed budget is complex, and to help you understand the budget, I'm going to take you through our revenue picture first, because the proposed budget is shaped by our revenue performance and our economic outlook. So bear with me as I get through this section. Next slide. Arizona is ranked #1 in the country in economic performance. We are also ranked really high in population growth, job growth since the pandemic, personal income growth, and we have very low unemployment. Our state revenues and fund balance are the strongest it's ever been. So at the state level, our outlook, economic outlook, is very positive. Next slide. On the local level, we continue to have a very strong recovery from the pandemic, with our retail, hotels, restaurants, and events all operating at or above our pre-pandemic levels. We have development activity and population growth. These are the 4 main areas that drive our local economy and generate revenues for the city. So our outlook is positive, but we are in a period of significant volatilities and uncertainties for the future. Next slide. First of all, we're coming to the end of the extraordinary stimulus. Over the last 2 years, the federal government unleashed the largest flood of stimulus money. Roughly $5 trillion went to households, businesses, and governments. We've seen an unprecedented spending with these stimulus funds. All this stimulus spending will be coming to an end. We're also facing the highest inflation in 40 years and rising interest rates, which may continue with the supply chain issues and war in Ukraine. How much of this will affect our consumer spending, our tourism industry, our property values and development? It is impossible to predict. We also have increasing competition from other valley cities as they grow and develop, which reduces our state share revenues as we become a smaller piece of the state shared pie. Our economy may be looking pretty bright right now for fiscal year 23, but we remain cautiously optimistic as these uncertainties and volatilities may have a significant impact. And because of these volatilities, our budget is conservative, and it also gives us the flexibility to respond to any downturns if we need to. Now I'd like to take you through our revenue picture as our revenue shapes our proposed budget. Next slide. So with all the stimulus spending spree that has happened over the last 2 years, our sales tax revenues hit an all-time high and have come in significantly more than our budget. The last 2 columns on the right shows the large difference between what we budgeted for sales tax revenues in the general fund and what we actually received in the last year and this year. $46.6 million more than we had budgeted. And take a look at the previous 10 years. It has never been that large of a budget to actual difference. Yes, we budgeted conservatively, and our target has always been actual tax revenues coming in within 2 to 4% above budget. We budgeted even more conservatively during the pandemic, but this huge difference between our budget and actual is fueled by the extraordinary federal stimulus and consumer spending spree over the last 2 years. Well, this excess revenues above our budget has given our general fund a boost. Next slide. We also received direct stimulus funds from the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act that further boosted our general fund. And we had some land sale proceeds and also a restatement of our fund balance. So all in all, we added, in addition to the excess sales tax revenues, another $81.3 million to the general fund, and next year another $14.6 million. These one-time revenues and excess revenues kind of helps us produce the budget appropriations for next year, as you see as we get into the budget. Next slide. The next major source of revenues, tax revenues in our general fund, is state shared revenues, and one of our largest state shared revenues is state shared income tax, which is the orange bars that you see on this chart. And you'll notice that for fiscal year 23, we are projecting quite a sharp increase in our income tax shared revenues, and that is because we receive state shared revenues, the income tax state shared revenues 2 years in arrears. That means the fiscal year 23 state shared income tax revenues are really income tax collections from fiscal year 21. And again, because of the pandemic and stimulus funds, fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 income tax collections are through the roof. So for us, our fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 state shared income tax revenues will be quite high. In the out years, we are projecting a slow reduction in those shared revenues because of the end of the stimulus and also the state implementing the flat tax and also a reduction in our share of the state shared pie. Next slide. And the third source of tax revenues is our property taxes. And some of you may be thinking that with the rise in property values, our property tax revenues must be significantly higher. Well, that is not the case. Our property tax levy is already at the maximum allowed by state law for the city of Scottsdale. So the maximum levy for for the general fund, which is about 35 million, can only grow by 2% plus new construction. So as our assessed values rise more than 2%, our levy is limited to a 2% growth. So our property tax rate in the proposed budget is actually a decrease from this year, from 1.1 to 0.91. Next slide. So putting all the previous discussion of revenues together, this is what our total overall general fund revenue picture looks like for the last 3 years and the next 5 years. Understanding this revenue picture is important to understanding our proposed budget for next year, because as you see, the last 3 years and even next year, we expect that we have excess revenues and one-time revenues above our normal trend line, our normal growth trend line. And these one-time excess revenues will be used to fund quite a bit of our one-time expenditure requests in the proposed budget. Next slide. This slide shows you what we have spent those one-time excess revenues on and what we're proposing to continue spending those one-time excess revenues on. And as you know, these one-time excess revenues, we are spending it on one-time needs and not on ongoing operating needs. I'm not going to go over this slide in detail, as we'll cover quite a lot of this as we go through the budget as well. Next slide. Now let's dive into our proposed 22-23 budget. Next slide. Our proposed budget is $2.1 billion, consisting of an operating budget of $658.8 million. That's the first orange box to the left. Then the gray boxes to the right. Our budget also includes grants and special districts. Capital improvements is 50% of the budget, contingencies and reserves. And under the operating budget, the yellow boxes, we have our general fund budget, which is our largest operating budget fund of $331.3 million, special revenue funds, our debt service enterprise funds, and internal service funds. Next slide. And this slide shows our proposed budget by category and compared to the prior year. And taking you through the slide, at the top of the slide, our personnel budget increases by 7.4%. The next slide shows the PRS, which is the Public Safety Pension Retirement System, where we are proposing a $12 million contribution next year compared to a $40 million this year. Our proposed budget for commodities and contracts, it's a reduction from this year's budget of 1.6%, and that's because we were spending stimulus and other grant funds, but not in next year's budget. But we have other increases that offset that, mainly inflation and other operational increases. Overall, our operating budget, the orange line, is a 1.5% decrease from this year's budget. Without the PSPR's contributions, our proposed operating budget would be about a 3% increase. And below that orange line, you'll see that the largest increase to our budget is capital and contingencies and reserves. And we'll go over that in more details later. So overall, our $2.1 billion budget is an 18% increase from this year's budget of $1.78 billion. Next slide. And this slide shows our operating budget by division. The increase for police and fire are mainly personnel costs. The increases in our other divisions are a combination of personnel costs, inflation, and other operating costs. A majority of these divisions are in our general fund. Next slide. So let's dive into the general fund budget. The general fund has an operating portion which totals $33.1 million. And also, the general fund budget includes a contingency and reserve portion as well. Next slide. So here's the proposed general fund budget by category and compared to this year's budget. The orange line shows the operating budget of $331 million, and right below it is the reserve and contingencies for the general fund of $147.8 million, for a total of $479.1 million budget for the general fund. Over 70% of the general fund operating budget is personnel, and the proposed personnel budget of $230.1 million is a 7.5% increase from this year's budget. And as you can see, the largest increase in our general fund budget is reserves and contingencies. We used to carry a 10% reserve in our general fund, and this year we changed our policy to increase our reserves to 25%, which gives us about 3 months of operating reserves, and our proposed budget reflects that change. And below the blue line, you'll see that we have transfers out of the general fund for debt service and capital. And as discussed earlier, we are proposing a $69 million transfer to capital from our excess revenues, a much larger transfer than in prior years. So next slide. And this is just a visual of the previous slide showing the change in our operating budget, our transfers out, and our reserves. And next slide. And now with the excess revenues, we are able to increase our, not only able to increase our reserves to 25% of our operating budget, which puts us in a much better position to respond to emergencies and unexpected events, and also puts us in line with best practices. With the excess revenues, and we are also able to set aside another $35.9 million for our PSPRS unfunded liability. That represents about 23% of the unfunded liability. Addressing the PSPRS liability will be an ongoing issue for quite some years, and the city manager has a good plan in place to do that. We're also able to set aside $15 million for general plan and innovation initiatives. These are council-directed initiatives to implement our general plan. And lastly, we have also increased our general fund contingencies to $10 million for any unexpected expenditures. Now I'm going to take you through highlights of some specific budget requests in our proposed budget. And as we go through the budget highlights, I'd like to point out that we put the budget together to address our budget priorities. Our budget proposes no tax increases, a decrease in the property tax rate, and modest increases in utility rates and other fees. Our budget also addresses council and community priorities such as the general plan, short-term rental, the Bond 2019 program, critical infrastructure, and public safety. We also put a budget together to address market challenges such as inflation and the labor market challenge we're facing right now. And we put a budget together that increases reserves and maintains the city's strong bond rating and financial health. Next slide. So to address the staffing and labor market challenges, our budget proposes 33.4 new FTEs. Most of the new FTEs are for public safety. This brings our total FTE count to 2,588.9. And to maintain our competitiveness in the labor market, the budget also includes a 5% market and 3% merit adjustment for staff. Now, the chart on the left shows our FTE count, which even though it increased, the orange line shows our FTE count per 1,000 population in 2010, 2020, and our estimate for 2023. And as you can see, even with the increase in proposed FTEs in the budget, our FTE per 1,000 population remains the same as 10 years ago, and it's even a decrease from 2010. Next slide. We put a budget together to address public safety priorities. There are 21.5 FTE requests, 5 of which is to create a short-term rental unit, 3 to create a park and preserve unit. We have 9 fire FTEs to replace attrition and retirement, another 1.5 to increase emergency management. We also budgeted $1 million in police overtime for the Super Bowl, and again, $12 million for additional contributions to PSPRS. Next slide. We put a budget together to address community needs and the inflation issue that we're facing. There are 4.23 FTEs proposed for public works, increases for trolley service cost increases, fuel increases, and parts increases, $3.4 million to replace vehicles and equipment, $300,000 for ADA modifications, and various increases for Super Bowl preparations. Next slide. This slide also highlights our community service budget to address our labor market challenges. We have proposed converting part-time labor to a full-time labor. And we are also proposing funding of some master plan and preserve ecological resource plan studies, and also increasing our budget for Westworld horse stalls and contract labor. Next slide. I'm almost at the end. Now we move on to the enterprise budget, which are primarily our water, sewer, and solid waste budgets. Next slide. Our proposed budget includes expenditures to continue securing our water and sewer systems. We have proposed 3 FTEs, $3.1 million to address increases in our cost of water purchase, $841,000 to address inflation of other operating costs, and our budget includes an average 3.4% increase in water rates and an average 4.7% increase in sewer rates. Next slide. For solid waste, we're proposing a minimal 1.98 FTEs, various increases due to inflation in container prices, landfill costs, and $600,000 for additional tractors and trailers for the brush and bulk trash program. And we're proposing some increases in our residential and commercial rates as well. Next slide. And finally, our budget puts a focus on investing in our critical infrastructure, as our capital improvement budget is over 50% of our total budget. Next slide. As you can see, it is significantly higher than the previous year capital budgets because of our Bond 2019 program, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the excess funds and one-time revenues we have, which we are dedicating to capital improvement projects. And Dan will go over these projects in more detail in his presentation. And next slide, and this is my last slide. And the proposed funding for our capital projects comes from a variety of sources. The enterprise projects are fully funded by enterprise funds and are not subsidized by taxes. And for the non-enterprise funds, we have a variety of other funding sources. For the Bond 2019 program, our proposed budget includes issuing $120 million in new debt for that program. The general fund is funding $117.9 million, and as you can see, these other sources that we have as well. And that ends my portion of the presentation, and I'm open for any questions before Dan does his presentation.
Thank you. I see no questions. I did notice the CAP Central Arizona project increased cost for water was shown at 19%. And I believe it's coming in at 25%, just a small, well, significant due to the water shortage. So that will be adjusted slightly. Councilwoman Whitehead, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you and the city manager for meeting with each of us on this budget. But also, I just want to stress again to the public that this is such a fiscally responsible budget, because what we've done, the best time to be fiscally responsible is when you have plenty of cash on hand. And so this doubling the reserve so that we're not cutting services, so we're in good shape when economies always go up and down. So there's a lot to like about this, certainly the investment in critical infrastructure and our employees that serve our constituents. So thank you.
Thank you, and I guess we'll look at the capital side next. Dan Worth is director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dan Worth, Public Works Director. I'm going to give you a short presentation on the proposed capital improvement plan. The slide that you're looking at is actually the exact same slide that we used to introduce this presentation a year ago. I thought that given the subject matter, it would be appropriate to update the picture for you. This is obviously, we've got a major project going on to revitalize our Civic Center Plaza going on right outside the front door here. But I also put this in for a purpose. I'm going to be including some pictures in the rest of the presentation to highlight some of the things that we've accomplished this year, as well as some of the things that are included in the program in the coming year. The pie chart on the left is the full 5-year plan. The CIP is a 5-year plan. It's broken out by category. The biggest category is water, wastewater, followed by transportation. You can see the other functional categories that we use. These functional categories generally mirror different fund sources. And the treasurer just showed you a slide that showed for the first year in the 5-year plan for fiscal year 22-23 how it breaks out by those fund sources. I'm going to give you some detail on each of the major fund sources as we move through the rest of the presentation. I will start with the general fund. Total general fund budget in the proposed CIP is about $118 million. This includes amounts that are rolled over from current year projects, and you'll see this in each of the funds. The CIP is the amounts roll over. That allows us to complete projects that are take more than a year, multiple year to complete. So we take the unspent portion of previously approved projects, we roll that forward, and then we add in new spending, and you can see the new spending in the bullets. We have some existing projects where we have had increases or we're proposing increases. We've got some new projects, and I've got a slide for each of those to give you some details. Connectivity is a special category. This is to support initiatives that emphasize connectivity within the downtown or promote the connectivity chapter in the general plan. The way that we arrived at $17 million, that is a very specific number. We had 2 land sales this year that generated over $20 million in revenue, and we're dedicating that to the connectivity. The $20 million in revenue, you're going to see in one of the subsequent slides, we have 2 projects that we're allocating some of that revenue to. One is the Sagebrush Theater renovation. The other is the 5th and Goldwater project. This is the balance, which we're setting aside for other potential initiatives that support that connectivity in the downtown in particular. And then below that, bond. We've been talking about this for the last few months. The bond projects were formulated, scoped, and estimated 3 or 4 years ago, and some of those scopes have changed, and some of the costs have changed dramatically, and we are proposing to take some general fund money and plus up some of the bond projects to allow them to be completed. And again, I'll show you a slide that shows the details on that. The picture, by the way, is one of our existing projects. We have what we call, you'll hear us refer to them as Y accounts in the capital program. These are projects where we have funding allocated every year to make programmatic improvements to revitalize and extend the life of existing capital assets. And this is an example of one of the things that we did with the facilities Y account this year. That's a 500 kW backup generator that's supporting the police facilities at District 1 in our McKellips Service Center area. We swapped out an old generator that was nearing end of life and revitalized the asset with a new generator. This is the list of existing projects in the general fund where we are adding funding. Most of these projects have nothing to do with the inflation that we're seeing. Most of these are simply adding a 5th year to those programmatic projects. We have to do that every year. We program 5 years at a time. We have to add that 5th year as part of each budget process. 2 exceptions at the bottom: community facility safety upgrades and a city building safety retrofit. These are projects that we started with Arizona CARES Act funding to make our buildings, about 33 of them, safer for the people that work in them and visit them, including this building. This was the ultraviolet and the ionization treatments for air to better combat the spread of airborne viruses. We've completed the vast majority of these, but we still have a number, particularly in parks facilities, some of our libraries, and the North Courtyard facility that we need to complete, and this is funding to do that. The picture is another one of those Y account projects. This is the replacement of the fabric on 2 of the arenas that we have at Westworld. New projects in the general fund. I'll highlight some of the bigger ones on the list. The first one is buying land for a future fire station. This is an area where Many of the existing houses are outside of the 5-minute response time polygon. This is to increase response times. The location that we're going to be looking at is somewhere in the vicinity of Hayden and Pinnacle Peak for this particular fire station. You see the Sagebrush Theater. The Sagebrush Theater renovation is an obligation in the development agreement with Museum Square developer. We have to relocate the front entrance of the theater in order to accommodate the traffic circulation, but at the same time, we're going to improve the surface parking associated with the theater, add about 30 spaces. We're going to create new improved restrooms and an improved lobby for the theater, so and replace the facade, make it look a lot newer than the 1965 era building that it is. McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. Just want to point out, this is also a major replacing the bunkhouse, building an 8,000 square foot building with a lot of amenities to support events and to support day-to-day use. And we are leveraging what we anticipate will be as much as a $1 million contribution from the Railroad Society. And then the last one I want to highlight, you see $6 million FCA, that's Facility Condition Assessment. This is a program that we started several years ago. We wanted to do some asset management for our buildings, similar to what we do for our streets and our asphalt. So this program we've been doing, like I said, for several years. We are stepping through and doing a facility assessment on all of our major buildings, grading all the individual components, identifying what needs to be replaced now and what needs to be replaced in the foreseeable future, programming that out. And then this is the first attempt to apply some funding to that. And by doing that, we anticipate that we're going to be able to keep the overall condition of our building inventory in the good range according to this assessment standard. So this is applying $2 million a year for 3 years to get started with that program. I also mentioned the bond projects that we identified, and we've mentioned these to you at the last capital program update. There were several projects. What you don't see in here is the $6.2 million for the project outside the front door, which you approved earlier this year. So that's in this year's budget. These are amounts that we're proposing in the fiscal year 22-23 budget to plus up the sequence of projects at the police fire training facility, the Westworld horse barns, and the multi-use sports fields. You see the fields that we've completed on Bell Road. We are in the process of building the fields at the east end of Westworld. And this $4 million will allow the final guaranteed maximum price award to be able to close those fields out. I'll transition into the bonds. This is just a quick snapshot status of where we are. The total bond program was $318 million. To date, we have budgeted $137 million of that, and we have spent about a third of that. And you can see we've also contractually committed substantial amounts, so we are moving forward on execution of the program. In fiscal year 22-23, not a lot of new project starts in the bond. A couple of solar projects, including one in the vicinity of this building, are scheduled and budgeted for 22-23 as new project starts. What we do have is a lot of funds that are programmed for 22-23 to take projects that are currently in design and move them into construction. And you can see some of the ones that we're talking about there to include that police fire training complex and a couple of other projects as well. Moving to transportation, two funds that I'll address. The 0.2% sales tax is the fund that we've used historically for both capital and for operating needs in the transportation area. Total amount budgeted, again, this includes amounts rolled over from current fiscal year plus additions. Total amount budgeted about $57 million. I'm going to show you a slide for each of the highlights showing here, changes to existing projects and new projects. The picture is an existing project that we're also adding funds to. If you drive up and down Scottsdale Road at night, hopefully you notice the new illuminated street signs, bigger, brighter, more visible. It's a safety feature as well as an aesthetic enhancement for our road. We're marching up Scottsdale Road, implementing those. More difficult than you think because power lines and other things that conflict with the optimum placement of these, but we're continuing to implement on Scottsdale Road, and we're proposing budget for the next 2 years to be able to expand it to the other major corridors in the city. Changes to existing projects that are funded by 0.2%. Most of these are similar to those Y accounts in the general fund. These are multi-year programs where we're adding a 5th year. We're also adding some funds in the pavement overlay program in each of the 5 years to be able to do more in the neighborhoods. And you can see the illuminated street signs, the second bullet there. We're adding funding for the 2nd and 3rd year of that program. The picture is somewhat appropriate to the discussion that we just had on the Transportation Master Plan. I put this picture here to highlight 2 of these Y account projects. One is the pavement overlay program. This is Indian School looking west from 68th Street. We did this earlier this year. We overlaid that street. And we also did, if you go down towards the bottom, 3rd line from the bottom, buffered bike lanes. This used to be 3 lanes westbound. And we took an action you may remember, to make a mid-year adjustment to the Transportation Master Plan to change the classification of this segment of Indian School Road so that we could go from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. The 2 lanes are wider than they used to be, and we still have the buffered bike lanes, so our cyclists can ride on this and have some protection. We did this, as Mr. Meinhardt explained, without moving the curb, without spending a lot of money. In conjunction with the pavement overlay program, we revitalized the asset and took advantage of the opportunity to right-size the street. And by all accounts, it's been handling traffic and performing well ever since we implemented it. Some new projects, admittedly, not a lot of new lanes or new streets, which we also mentioned in the Transportation Action Plan program. Focus more on maintaining. One new segment, about halfway down the list, it's actually the biggest number on here, is the segment of Alma School, north and south of Joe Max. It's a 2-lane segment that has 4 lanes, both north and south of it. This is to complete the ultimate 4-lane cross-section through from Alma School, from Happy Valley to Dynamite. A couple of other things I want to point out. At the bottom, North Corporation Yard, compressed natural gas and parking structure projects, 2 projects. These aren't new projects, but this is a new funding source. One of the primary purposes of both of these projects is to support the move of our trolleys from our southern facility on McKellips up to our northern facility off of Via Linda. It's more central to the operating location for the trolleys. It's where they fuel anyway. It's going to reduce operating costs and generate savings long term, but because we're doing it to support the transportation use, we felt it was appropriate to put some transportation funding into that, into those 2 projects. The picture is my existing material storage yard. This is just east of the water campus. It's not pretty, it's not secured. We felt that it was important on both counts to do something to make it more aesthetically pleasing and safer. So you can see that we've allocated some transportation funding to be able to enclose and improve the storage area that we have there. The other major transportation fund, the 0.1% sales tax, this is the 10-year tax that was passed by voters in 2018. This was primarily intended to help us provide the matching funds to support the regional funding through the arterial life cycle program. For our major projects, the total amount that we have budgeted in this funding source is about $45 million for the coming year. You can see a couple of project highlights. I know we've been hearing from a lot of people that anticipate the improvements on Happy Valley from Pima Road to Alma School, and on Pima Road from Pinnacle Peak to Happy Valley. That is coming. That is a very large project that's funded through the ALCP with some funds from the 0.1% sales tax. We're in construction on the Rain Tree project through the air park. What you see there is the berth of a roundabout at what is currently Redfield and 76th Place as part of that project. And I think the real key on this slide is the bottom bullet. This $45 million is leveraging $144 million coming to the city in regional funding through MAG and the Arterial Life Cycle Program. So it's a big bang for the buck. The stormwater fee, a relatively small program, total amount budgeted in the coming year, about $20 million. You can see the project changes that we're proposing. The first two are adding some funds, but really it's breaking out what had been a single project into two phases on Granite Reef. And the other two are in, the next two rather, Roosevelt and True North are in the out years. We're adding new projects that are identified through area drainage studies and other means in years 4 and 5 as projected funding becomes available. And just like on the last slide, the key here is that right column, other agency funds. The Granite Reef Watershed, the vast majority of the funding is coming from other agencies. Federal grant that was obtained by the Salt River Pima community. The Salt River Pima community themselves is providing funding, and the Maricopa County Flood Control District. And the Flood Control District is providing half of the funding for the True North project in 24, 25, I believe is when we have that budgeted. So this is a fee that we also leverage to get a lot of external funding. And then the last fund that I want to talk about, water, wastewater, the biggest piece of the capital program. The $432 million that you see there includes actual multiple funding sources, includes water rates, wastewater rates, development fees, IWDS, and some of the other specialty revenue sources that are part of the water program. And I show a couple of key highlights that our water resources director asked me to highlight for him. These both support Scottsdale Water's drought response. The deep well recovery, and that's the picture that you see. This is an aquifer storage and recovery well that we recently drilled and are now outfitting near 1 Scottsdale, Legacy Boulevard. But the deep well recharge recovery projects enhance our ability to store and then reuse water in the future. And then the Joe Max Road Sewer, a pretty substantial wastewater project, takes properties off of septic and has them putting water into our system so that we can retreat it and reuse it. So both very much in support of the drought response program. And then the last picture, I don't have any projects to talk about on the preserve because we've built them. This is the most recent preserve trailhead that we completed at Pima and Dynamite, but it has been a pretty substantial part of our program and is certainly a success story from this current year. And I wanted to highlight that on the last slide, and with that I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
I see Councilwoman Whitehead, and we have one speaker for the public, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's actually not for Mr. Worth. Thank you for the presentation. Love a lot of those priorities. How many septic tanks are we talking about up at Joe Max?
I could only guess.
Okay, that's fine. So I did want to touch on, and it probably has to do with our speaker, go back to the general fund, and since we have Kira here, we did hear a lot about the library budget, and of course we all want to protect our libraries. Would you help us understand where we're at in terms of library usage, how we're going to, I don't want to not invest enough, which doesn't enable us to get to where we'd like to be with library usage. So I don't know if you want to talk to that, or if we do have Ms. Raymond here, perhaps she wants to speak first. Mayor, should we have public comment first?
Well, then, yes, if you're concluded, I will open public comment, and we have one speaker, Sheila Raymond.
Okay. 3 minutes. Here we go. Good evening, Mayor Ortega, Vice Mayor Caputi, and members of City Council. My name is Sheila Raymond. I am here as a citizen of Scottsdale, a patron of the Scottsdale Public Library, and chairperson of the Library Board, and it is in that order that I address you today. Scottsdale has so many wonderful experiences to offer to our community. Scottsdale citizens know that living in Scottsdale is both diverse and rewarding. Among the many benefits that Scottsdale offers are the services that are made available to the community. That is what Scottsdale Public Library is, a service. The library is not a money-generating business. The Scottsdale Public Library should not have to count on selling books in order to meet their budget needs. Speaking of books, the library is more than having books available for checkout. The staff at our 4 library branches are available as a public resource. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic forced all branches to close. The staff quickly found a way to open to the public when other library systems in the valley remained closed. Only 2 branches were able to have people visit in person during restricted hours. All 4 were available for drive-up services. 1 branch launched an innovative system to allow for people to enter, but not to have staff to interact and available for assistance. Other Valley and National Library Services contacted our staff to find out how they could open their systems. Although access was limited, the staff stepped up for the community. Computers were available for job searches, resume writing, and email. The staff were able to connect patrons to Health and Human Services as they struggled to make ends meet for whatever reason during the COVID-19 pandemic. The materials budget was cut 54.5% this fiscal year, and according to a presentation of the city budget breakdown presented by Brian Bundy to the Library Board on June 16, 2021, all departments were restored with an increase to their budget compared to the pre-pandemic fiscal year 18-19. There were 2 exceptions. Human Services, who were fortunate to receive the federal CARES funds, and the library, which was reduced by just over $1 million. The staff has requested only $550,000 for fiscal year 22-23. I could continue to throw a lot of numbers and statistics at you, but I need to convey the human needs that the Scottsdale Public Library deserves for your community. All citizens, every age, from infants to the most senior of our seniors, rely and benefit from strong public library. Our system was only able to open fully from January 10th, 2022. There aren't a lot of metrics to be able to measure. Please restore the library budget at least to where the library staff has requested, and we can build an even stronger system for our Scottsdale community. Thank you for your time, and I have 12 seconds left. Thank you.
Well, thank you. At this point, I will close public comment. The purpose of item 23 regarding our budget presentation and the capital outlays was just to present again for the public's information, and if there was any guidance on the part of the council, but we don't have it's part of the process of reviewing the finalizing budget. Councilwoman Whitehead, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'll just add that that is an area that I would like to explore, so I'll be asking staff to provide information about what it would take to get what staff requested. Thank you so much.
Okay. At this point, then, I don't see any need. Councilwoman Littlefield. Yeah. Okay. So at this point, we have finished the regular agenda items, and I would reopen public comment. It's the opportunity at the end of. At the beginning and at the end for public to come forward on a non-agendized item. I see none. We did have 5 earlier. Next item would be the receipt, excuse me, of petitions. And at this point, we did receive a petition. If you'd like to report that, we received a petition on behalf of Mr. Abranovic, and his presentation made during public comment with a substantial number of signatures. I would refresh the council's review of that. We have one up at the dais. And at this point, upon receipt of a citizen petition, we are empowered to accept it, which the clerk has done properly, and we can acknowledge the receipt of a citizen's petition. And at this point, we have three choices. We will not be discussing the details of the petition. In part, it originates both the status of a property and neighborhood questions about enforcement. We have three choices. One is to direct the city manager to agendize the petition for further discussion. Second choice, receipt of a petition, direct the city manager to investigate and report a written response to the council with a copy to the petitioner. And number three would take no action. I would recommend we go with item number 2, which is direct the city manager to investigate the matter, prepare a written response to the council with a copy to the petitioner.
I'll second that.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote. Okay. It does pass. Let me allow Councilmember Durham. The subject was for the petition that we received, and the motion was to have the city manager prepare a report to the council. So we're voting to affirm that, and I see a yes. Therefore, we have a unanimous direction of the council. The other item that we have on the agenda would be to consider any mayor and council items, and I've a request from Councilwoman Littlefield. Hello.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope, we had an item that was continued tonight, the Artisan in downtown, and I hope that the downtown merchants and the developer of the Artisan can reach an agreement on mitigating the negative impacts of the project's construction in the surrounding areas. But those merchants should not have to negotiate deals on a project-by-project basis. If we're going to continue to approve these large and dense projects, we need a tough, fair construction mitigation ordinance. Other cities like ours have such ordinances in place, and I believe that we should also. So I request the council to direct staff to create a construction mitigation ordinance for the city of Scottsdale. We should look at the plans of that other cities have adopted and what issues and problems that they have helped solve, and how we could craft a plan to best deal with the construction issues that Scottsdale is facing.
Second. Okay, any other discussion real quick? Again, it's a new item, so we don't really have margin to discuss the topic. Please record your vote. Okay, it is a 5-2 vote to move that one forward. Second, finally, I call again for any other mayor and council items. Seeing none, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded. Please,
thank you.
Please record your vote. Unanimous. Good evening to all. It's the last meeting of April 2022.